I'm Hank, and I am a survivor of sexual assaults. It started when I was 5 years of age. It went on not only to 16 years of age, but also afterwards as a young adult. And I had an experience of abuse and domestic violence in my home as a child from my father, who was an alcoholic, and most of his family were. Also, a long-term experience from the age of 5 to 16 with a brother of his, my uncle, and that was an incestuous relationship experience. And then as a young adult, about 21, 22, I was sexually assaulted by a predator priest. So I have several experiences that have impacted my life over the years, but I've been able to manage and heal. The domestic violence experiences and trauma set me up for desperate vulnerability to be victimized by my father, by my uncle, and by this priest, and several other relationships as a young man. What I come from is a family. My grandparents were Mexican. They immigrated to United States. My father was born here in the United States, but he retained the machismoism that is very predominant in Hispanic families. Not only that, he comes from a military background of being a Marine. We were treated in our household as part of the military. He was very authoritarian. He enforced rules. The ones that impacted me most and set me up for being victimized were not to ever disrespect or disregard elders when you're being spoken to, not to cry, not to complain, and to say yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am to whatever adult you were facing. That really was kind of the crux of the start of the trauma, because I was told not to say no, not to question, and not to complain. The tipping point for me was the fact that I learned tragically that a nephew of mine was sexually assaulted by the same uncle who assaulted me as a child. And he was having difficulties, and they were trying to get him into counseling. His personality changed. I recognized some of those indicators. So I confronted my uncle, I confronted my parents, my family. So I went looking for resources for support. So at that point, I was about 19, 20 years old. I started college and I had left home, but I knew this situation was desperate. And I found very little support at that time. This was in the mid-'80s. And everything that I found as far as resource books and articles were addressed to female survivors. So in my mind, all I could do was just take out the female part and put my gender in there. And the more I realized that there were not many resources available, I decided that I need to try to pull some of these together that I'd seen and heard about. Jim Struve was one of the very first therapists that got onto my list of therapists from around the country very early on as being someone who's working with male survivors. So from that, I started to collect therapist names, and it was all word of mouth. I wrote a newsletter, and the newsletter I would send out to anyone who wanted, and I offered it for free. I paid everything out of pocket. I did it myself. I didn't have any publishing experience, and I wasn't a writer, but it gradually started to gain momentum. A local counselor, this was in Los Angeles when I lived there, asked me to accompany him on an interview on local TV to tell my story. And that was the first time I'd ever went public on television, let alone anything larger than that. And from that, my newsletter took off even more. I decided I needed to organize into a legitimate nonprofit organization. And so I established one. I got a board of directors from local people that were involved. Most of them were with female survivor organizations and agencies. But we worked to build up, and mine was the first. So I'm often referred to as the pioneer of male survivor organizations. And from that, now we have quite a few. And that was exciting to know that I had something to do with getting that started. I never expected to be a national advocate or a nonprofit director, but it just took momentum to the point that I became a national speaker and a representative for male survivors around the country. And even internationally, I've received letters and connections. One of them ultimately led to my appearing on the Oprah show for her final season. We were a group of 200 men, and that was a life experience I'll never forget, because there were a lot of us there who I had only seen in magazines or on TV interviews or at conferences, but never really met. And it was just very powerful to have that experience. And I'll carry that with me for a long, long time. My partner Antonio and I will be celebrating 40 years next year together. We met in 1983, and that has been the testament for me, unconditional love that I've only dreamt about and read about as a teenager and a young man. So I'm grateful for it, and gratitude is best expressed through actions, and we have that between us that has lasted this long, and I'm very thankful for it. I've taken up projects and skills that I've always was curious about, wanted to know if I had talent, and I pursued them. One of them is oil painting, and I've really taken to that. I started in 2009, was my first class that I went to, just on a whim. I just thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. I've got the time, and let's see if there's anything here. And I just really enjoyed it. And that has been one of the things that I often fall back on, is being outdoors sometimes if I can, or just being in a studio painting landscapes of the area that I live in. It's really made a big difference in keeping my mind focused and calm and stress-free. I encourage everyone to try to find their skill or talent or interest, and just do it. If it brings you joy, if it brings you calm, if it brings you solitude, that's a good way to go. I'd like to leave you with is healing management, and its management is an ongoing, lifelong journey of challenges, achievements, potential, and opportunities that we, each of us survivors, have final say of and power over.